Imagine walking into a bank full of hope, only to have your future ripped apart in front of you. That's exactly what happened to 16-year-old Destiny Williams, a simple check for her Harvard tuition, torn to pieces, all because of a single biased assumption. But what this bank manager didn't know? Her mother is a millionaire CEO ready to turn the tables. It was a warm spring morning in Charlotte, North Carolina. The sun spilled through the tall glass windows of First National Bank, where a few people waited in line, scrolling on their phones, tapping their feet impatiently. Among them stood Destiny Williams, a 17-year-old black girl with deep brown eyes and a soft, confident smile. She wore her navy blue school blazer, her Harvard acceptance pin gleaming on the lapel. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from excitement, as she held a check worth $45,000, her scholarship funds for Harvard's early medical program. She had dreamed of this moment for years. Her mother, Regina Williams, always said, "Walk in with your head high, baby. You belong in every room you enter." When her turn came, Destiny stepped forward to the counter. "Good morning, sir," she said politely, to the middle-aged bank manager in a crisp gray suit, James Morrison. "I'd like to deposit this check, please." James glanced at her, barely lifting his eyes from the screen. His tone was flat, dismissive. "Deposit? How much are we talking about?" Destiny slid the check across the counter. $45,000. It's for my tuition at Harvard." James blinked, then laughed under his breath. "Harvard? You?" His eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down, scanning her youthful face and the public school logo on her bag. "You said this is yours?" "Yes, sir," Destiny replied calmly. "It's from the Stevens Academic Foundation." He picked up the check, flipping it back and forth as if it were a fake ID. I've seen a lot of things, but this?" He scoffed loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "Do you really expect me to believe a teenager from, what neighborhood was that again, has a $45,000 check from Harvard?" A few customers turned to look. Destiny's throat tightened, but she stood tall. "Sir, I understand it's unusual. You can verify the issuing foundation. It's legitimate." But James wasn't listening. He motioned to another teller, muttering, "Call security, just in case." Then, with a smirk, he tore the check right down the middle, the sound sharp and shocking in the quiet bank. The entire room froze. Destiny's eyes widened. Why would you do that? That's a real check." James leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. "I don't know what scam you're running, young lady, but not here. You should be thankful I don't call the cops for attempted fraud." Her hands shook, not from fear this time, but from disbelief. Still, she didn't raise her voice. "Sir, I'm going to ask for a copy of the security footage from today, and I'll be reporting this to your head office." James chuckled. "You go right ahead, sweetheart. Maybe next time you'll think twice before faking checks." Destiny turned, her heart pounding as murmurs rippled through the room. She walked out of the bank with quiet dignity, pulling out her phone. She typed a short message to her mom. "Mom, it happened again. At the bank this time." Her phone buzzed almost instantly with a reply. "Don't worry, baby. I'll handle it." Destiny took a deep breath, standing beneath the morning sun. She didn't know it yet, but this day would change everything. That afternoon, Destiny sat quietly in her room, the blinds half closed, the checks torn halves still folded inside a clear plastic bag on her desk. She had picked them up before leaving the bank, not out of anger, but because she knew they would matter later. Her phone buzzed again. It was her mother, Regina Williams, calling from her downtown office. The faint sound of typing and phones echoed behind her voice. "Sweetheart," Regina said calmly, "tell me everything, every detail." Destiny explained what had happened. James's tone, his smirk, the laughter, the sound of the paper ripping. She hesitated at the end, voice trembling. "He didn't even ask to verify it, Mom. He just assumed it was fake because of how I look." For a moment, Regina said nothing. The only sound was her slow exhale. "You did the right thing by staying calm. Now it's my turn." Regina hung up, spun her chair toward the window, and stared down at the skyline of Charlotte's business district. On the glass behind her, the gold letters spelled out, "Williams Tech Solutions," one of the fastest-growing cybersecurity firms in the country. She reached for her phone and sent 2 messages. One to her assistant, "Schedule a meeting with Victoria Chun at First National Bank tomorrow morning." And another to Destiny, "Keep that torn check safe. We'll need it." Meanwhile, across town, James Morrison sat at his desk in the manager's office, sipping lukewarm coffee and scrolling through emails. He chuckled as he told the story to a young teller nearby. "Can you believe that? Kid walks in here saying she's got a 45 grand check from Harvard. I mean, come on. I did her a favor before she got in real trouble." The teller gave a nervous laugh, unsure whether to agree or not. James leaned back, smug. That's the problem these days. Everyone thinks they're special. He didn't know that at that very moment, the bank's CEO, Victoria Chun, had just received a meeting request from Regina Williams. And when she saw the name, she frowned thoughtfully. Williams Tech Solutions was their cybersecurity partner and a 12% shareholder in the bank's parent company. Victoria immediately replied, "Confirmed, 10 a.m. tomorrow." That evening, Destiny sat with her laptop open, typing an email to the Stevens Academic Foundation. "Dear Mrs. Ortega, the check for my tuition was destroyed by a bank manager who believed it was fraudulent. Could you please issue a replacement and send verification to First National Bank's corporate office?" Her message was polite, factual, not bitter. She knew losing control would only feed their stereotypes. When she hit send, she exhaled and whispered to herself, "You taught me better than to fight small battles, Mom." Downstairs, Regina prepared her notes and printed copies of the bank's contract with Williams Tech Solutions. Her expression was unreadable, calm, but cold. She looked at a framed photo on her desk, little Destiny at her 5th grade science fair holding a trophy with both hands. Beneath it was a plaque engraved with her favorite quote, "Grace under fire is power." She smiled faintly. Let's remind them who they're dealing with. The next morning would not just be a meeting, it would be a reckoning. The next morning, the city of Charlotte stirred awake under a sky brushed with gray clouds. The streets outside First National Bank were already busy when Regina Williams stepped out of her black Tesla, her heels clicking sharply on the marble pavement. She wore a tailored cream suit, simple but commanding. Destiny followed beside her, hair neatly braided, wearing a pale blue blouse and blazer. Despite the calm exterior, Destiny's palms were cold with nerves. "Mom, what if they just deny it? Say it never happened." Regina smiled slightly. "Then we'll show them proof. Remember, never raise your voice when you already hold the power." As they walked inside,
The same security guard from yesterday recognized Destiny and stiffened. The tension in the lobby was thick. Whispers began the moment they entered. Meanwhile, upstairs in her glass office, Victoria Chun, the bank's CEO, prepared the meeting room. She knew Regina well. Their companies had worked together for 5 years, but she hadn't yet been told why this meeting was happening. Down in the lobby, James Morrison was just finishing his morning coffee. He saw Destiny and froze for a second. Then he smirked, muttering to his colleague, "Oh, great, she's back, probably to apologize." Destiny heard him, but didn't flinch. She turned toward him, her voice clear and steady. "Actually, Mr. Morrison, I'm here for a meeting with your CEO." James blinked, confused, but before he could reply, the receptionist said, "Ms. Williams, Miss Chun is ready for you upstairs." The elevator ride was silent, except for the faint hum of the cables. Destiny glanced at her mother. Regina's expression hadn't changed, serene but focused. When they stepped into the boardroom, Victoria rose from her seat. "Regina, it's been too long. What brings you here?" Regina shook her hand firmly. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice, Victoria. It's about one of your employees and an incident that took place yesterday." She handed over a slim folder. Inside were screenshots of the destroyed check, the email confirmation from the Stevens Foundation, and a copy of the bank's security system agreement, all under Williams Tech Solutions. Victoria's brow furrowed. "I see. And which employee was this?" Regina didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the door and said to the assistant, "Could you please have James Morrison join us?" Downstairs, James's phone buzzed. "Mr. Morrison, the CEO would like to see you in her office." He straightened his tie, grinning. "Told ya," he said to his coworker, "probably wants to thank me for catching a scam." He stepped into the elevator, oblivious to the storm waiting upstairs. Meanwhile, Destiny stood by the window, looking out over the skyline. Her heart raced, but she remembered her mom's words, "Never raise your voice when you already hold the power." Regina glanced at her daughter and spoke softly. "Whatever happens, let them see your strength, not your pain." The elevator doors opened with a quiet ding. James walked in, smiling, until his eyes met Destiny's, and then Regina's. His grin faltered. Victoria looked up from the documents and said calmly, "Mr. Morrison, I believe we have a serious matter to discuss." The air in the room turned heavy. For the first time, James didn't feel like the one in control.
James hesitated at the doorway, clutching the folder he had brought as if it could shield him from what was about to unfold. Victoria gestured for him to sit. "Close the door, Mr. Morrison." He obeyed, forcing a polite smile as he glanced nervously between the three women. Destiny sat quietly beside her mother, her posture straight, eyes steady. Regina's expression was unreadable, calm, but sharp enough to slice through steel. Victoria cleared her throat. "Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Williams here is one of our corporate partners, CEO of Williams Tech Solutions." James's face twitched. He blinked, looking from Victoria to Regina, then down at Destiny. His voice cracked. "Williams Tech? As in our cybersecurity provider?" Regina gave a slight nod. "That's correct. And also a 12% shareholder in this bank." The color drained from James's face. Victoria opened the folder Regina had handed her earlier. "Regina has brought some serious allegations to my attention. According to this, you destroyed a client's check without verification, used discriminatory language, and threatened police action." James's composure began to crumble. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I believed the check was fake. She was just a teenager with a $45,000 check. I followed my gut." Regina leaned forward, her tone calm but cold. "Your gut?" She slid a printed image across the table. The security camera still frame showing James tearing the check. "Your gut
told you that a young black woman couldn't possibly have earned that money honestly? That she didn't deserve to be treated with basic respect? James opened his mouth, but no words came out. Victoria turned to Destiny. "Miss Williams, would you like to share your side?" Destiny swallowed hard. Her voice was soft, but unwavering. "I told him the check was from the Stevens Academic Foundation. I offered to verify it. He didn't even look. He just tore it in half and said I should be thankful he didn't call the cops." Victoria's expression darkened. She looked at James. "Is that true?" James stammered, I didn't mean any harm. I was trying to protect the bank." Regina interjected quietly. "From a Harvard-bound student depositing a scholarship check?" Silence filled the room. After a long moment, Victoria sighed. "James, I'm placing you on immediate suspension pending investigation." James's voice rose, desperate now. "Please, I've been with this bank for 18 years. This is all a misunderstanding." Regina stood, gathering her papers. "Victoria, I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for accountability. I'll let you decide how your institution wishes to proceed." Destiny rose with her, giving James one last look, not of anger, but disappointment. Regina turned to Victoria. "Tomorrow I'll send over a formal proposal. I believe we can turn this into an opportunity to make things right, for your employees and for your reputation." Victoria nodded slowly. "I'll expect it." As Regina and Destiny left the room, the door clicked softly behind them. James slumped into his chair, face pale. "She's a shareholder," he whispered to himself, hands trembling. "What have I done?" Outside, as they stepped into the morning sun, Destiny let out the breath she'd been holding. "Mom, are you going to fire him?" Regina smiled faintly. "No, baby. I'm going to teach him something he'll never forget." She opened the car door, eyes fixed ahead. Justice isn't revenge. It's correction.
The next day dawned crisp and bright over Charlotte. At the headquarters of First National Bank, tension rippled quietly through the upper floors. Word of the incident had started to spread, though few employees knew the full story. Only that the CEO herself had called for an emergency meeting involving one of their longest-serving managers. Inside the conference room, Regina sat poised at the head of the polished oak table. Beside her, Destiny reviewed a few notes, her calm demeanor concealing the nervous rhythm of her heartbeat. Across from them sat Victoria Chun, the CEO, looking unsettled but determined to set things right. "Mrs. Williams," Victoria began, "thank you for giving us a chance to handle this appropriately. I understand you've prepared a proposal." Regina nodded. "Yes, I have, but before that, I think it's important for Mr. Morrison to understand what his actions really meant." Victoria glanced toward the door. "Security, please bring in Mr. Morrison." A moment later, James entered the room, his once confident stride now replaced by stiff, uneasy steps. His tie was slightly crooked, his eyes darted around before settling on Destiny. She met his gaze without a word. "Mr. Morrison," Victoria said evenly, "Mrs. Williams and her daughter have agreed to meet with us to discuss the incident. I expect complete honesty." James nodded weakly. "Yes, ma'am." Regina turned toward him. "Mr. Morrison, tell me, what did you see when my daughter walked into your bank yesterday?" He hesitated. I saw a young woman with a large check. It didn't look right. It didn't fit the usual profile." "The usual profile?" Regina's tone sharpened slightly. "And what profile is that?" He fumbled. "I just mean, most clients with checks that large don't usually come alone or look—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Destiny sat quietly, her fingers clasped in her lap. Regina leaned forward, her voice low, steady, and powerful. "Mr. Morrison, my daughter earned that scholarship through years of dedication, straight A's, volunteer hours at the Children's Hospital, a Harvard acceptance letter she worked for since she was 12. But when she came to your bank, you saw none of that. You saw only her skin. James' shoulders slumped. I didn't mean... You did, Regina interrupted gently but firmly. And it's time you face what that means. Victoria spoke next, her tone solemn. Mr. Morrison, the footage confirms that you destroyed the check, used discriminatory language, and threatened to call law enforcement without cause. This is a violation of company policy, and frankly, of basic human decency. James buried his face in his hands. Please, I've got a family. I made a mistake. Destiny's voice broke the silence, soft but resolute. Everyone makes mistakes, but some mistakes don't just hurt feelings, they destroy trust. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Regina stood. Victoria, my company believes in reform, not revenge. I'll be submitting a set of conditions to ensure something like this never happens again. Not to my daughter, not to anyone. Victoria nodded. And you have my word, we'll review them immediately. As Regina and Destiny turned to leave, James whispered, Mrs. Williams, I'm sorry. Truly. Regina paused at the doorway, glancing back only once. I hope you are, because the apology isn't to me. It's to every person you ever doubted because of who they are. She walked out, her daughter following beside her. The hallway lights reflected off the glass walls, a mirror of quiet power and grace. Destiny exhaled. Do you think he'll change? Regina smiled faintly. If he doesn't, the world around him will.
3 days later, the air inside First National Bank's boardroom was electric with tension. The entire executive team had gathered. HR directors, compliance officers, and a few key shareholders. At the head of the table sat Victoria Chun, looking composed but grave. Across from her, Regina Williams placed a neatly bound document on the table, labeled Proposal for Institutional Reform and Restorative Action. Beside her, Destiny sat quietly, watching. Though young, she carried herself with a maturity beyond her years, her calm presence a mirror of her mother's. Victoria opened the document, skimming the bold headlines. Immediate termination of James Morrison for violation of conduct policy and discriminatory behavior. Mandatory diversity and anti-bias training for all employees within 60 days. Establishment of a $500,000 scholarship fund, the Williams Scholarship for Equality, dedicated to supporting Black and underrepresented students pursuing higher education. Public acknowledgement and apology from the bank to the Williams family and to the broader community. When she finished reading, Victoria looked up. This is fair. It's also the right thing to do. Regina nodded. I don't want this to be about punishment. I want it to be about change. James sat at the far end of the table, pale and silent. He had been invited to witness the discussion, but the shame was visible in every slump of his shoulders. His career, 18 years in banking, was unraveling in front of him. Victoria turned to him. Mr. Morrison, do you have anything you wish to say before we finalize this? James cleared his throat, his voice trembling. I was wrong. I made assumptions that no one should make. I disrespected your daughter, Mrs. Williams, and I disgraced this bank. I'll accept whatever decision is made. Regina regarded him for a long, quiet moment. Mr. Morrison, she said softly, I'm not asking you to beg for forgiveness. I just hope this experience teaches you to see people for who they are, not what you assume they're not. James nodded, his eyes red. I understand.
Victoria signed the termination papers, then passed them to HR. Effective immediately. James rose slowly, gathering his few belongings. As he turned to leave, Destiny spoke, gently but firmly. "I don't hate you, Mr. Morrison, but I hope the next time someone like me walks into your life, you'll treat them with the same respect you want for yourself." He stopped at the door, swallowing hard. "I will." Then he left, closing it quietly behind him. When the door shut, silence filled the room again. Regina looked at Victoria. "Let's make sure this doesn't end with a press release. Let's make it mean something." Victoria smiled faintly. "You have my word. The Williams Scholarship will launch this summer." Destiny's eyes lit up. "Can I help design it?" Regina smiled proudly. "You'll lead it." Later that evening, mother and daughter walked out of the glass tower into the fading orange sunset. The reflection of the building shimmered behind them, a symbol of change born from confrontation. Destiny slipped her hand into her mother's. "You didn't have to do all that for me, Mom." Regina squeezed her hand. "I didn't do it for you, baby. I did it because of you. You reminded them and me that dignity is worth defending." As the sun dipped below the skyline, the first step towards transformation had begun, not just for one family, but for an entire institution. A crisp autumn breeze swept across the Harvard campus, scattering golden leaves over the stone steps of Sanders Theater. The banners read, "The Williams Scholarship for Equality, First Annual Recipients Ceremony." Inside, the hall glowed with warm light and murmurs of pride. Students from across the country filled the seats, many of them young, hopeful faces who, like Destiny once did, carried dreams bigger than their circumstances. On stage, Destiny Williams stood behind a mahogany podium, wearing her white medical coat and a small golden pin that read, "Harvard School of Medicine, Class of 2031. Her mother sat in the front row, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Destiny looked out at the audience. She took a deep breath, smiled, and began. "A year ago, I walked into a bank with a check for my future and walked out feeling like I didn't belong in it. That moment could have broken me, but instead, it built me." The crowd fell silent, hanging on her every word. "My mother taught me that dignity isn't what others give you. It's what you hold on to when they try to take it away. And today, standing here, I realize that strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the courage to stay calm when you have every reason to scream." She paused and glanced down at her mom. "We created this scholarship so no young person will ever be told they don't deserve what they've earned because of where they come from, what they look like, or who they are. This is more than a scholarship. It's a promise." Applause thundered through the room. Regina's eyes welled with tears, her lips curling into a proud, trembling smile. Outside the theater, the sky deepened to a soft purple hue. As people filed out, Regina wrapped her arm around Destiny. "You did beautifully, sweetheart." "Thanks, Mom. But this," Destiny looked back at the building glowing behind them, "this belongs to both of us." They walked across Harvard Yard, leaves crunching underfoot, laughter drifting between them like music. Across town, in a quiet cafe, James Morrison watched the ceremony streaming on his phone.
He sat alone at a corner table, still in his grocery uniform. When Destiny's words echoed through the speakers, "Dignity isn't what others give you," he lowered his head, overcome with emotion. He whispered to himself, "She became everything I wasn't brave enough to see." He closed his eyes for a moment, then smiled faintly, not with regret this time, but with gratitude. Because even in his downfall, he had witnessed a story that changed him forever. Back in the city, Regina and Destiny returned home. The sun dipped below the skyline, reflecting off the tall glass windows of Williams Tech Solutions, now displaying a new slogan on its entrance sign: Integrity, Innovation, Inclusion. Regina paused at the door, gazing up at it. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Destiny grinned. "We're just getting started." The two women walked inside, mother and daughter, both trailblazers, both proof that strength doesn't come from power or privilege, but from grace under fire. The camera panned upward, the city lights flickering alive as the night embraced them. A quiet, powerful ending to a story of justice, courage, and change.